Afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Timberscan for Sage 300 webinar. My name is Marika Deemer, a marketing coordinator here at Action Associates. Just some quick housekeeping items. Today's webinar will be recorded, so you are muted, and we'll share the link to the recording after the webinar. During the presentation, please use the Q&A feature to ask any questions if needed, and we'll answer them during the Q&A session at the end. Also, if you experience any technical issues during the webinar, you may also use the Q&A feature, and I'll do my best to assist you while the webinar is currently going. Also, we have provided a post-webinar survey, which is already available in your webinar console. Please fill that out as your feedback is important to us. Now let me introduce you to our presenter today, Leanne Oskanian. Leanne has 25 years of accounting management and sales experience in the construction industry software sector. Prior to joining AvidXchange, her focus was in ERP software for the construction industry, including enterprise content management and automated workflow solutions. I'm now going to turn it over to Leanne to get going to the content today. So go ahead, Leanne.
Great. Thank you, Mars. Appreciate the introduction, and thanks everyone to joining today. I know everyone's busy, so really appreciate everyone carving out some time to participate in the live webinar. The theme of our session today is going to be using Timberscan for Sage 300 CRE to automate your accounts payable process. What I'm going to cover, I'm just going to start with a brief overview of AvidXchange. So for those of you that might not be familiar with who we are, just want to give you a little background there. Then we're going to talk about some of the problems with the manual AP process. We'll review the invoice to pay workflow. And then we're going to follow that up with a product demonstration to take a look at Timberscan. And then we'll wrap things up with just a brief summary on some of the benefits of automation. Our mission at AvidXchange is really to transform the way companies are paying and receiving their bills by providing a solution to be able to automate that complete invoice to pay process. Right? We've been in business for over 20 years. We are a publicly traded company, so we're held to very rigid security standards and protocols. We have over 2,000 employees in 6 offices across the U.S. Our headquarters is in Charlotte, North Carolina, so that's where the lion's share of our employees do reside. We have over 10,000 customers as well. So those are companies that are using our solutions and services to automate their AP processes every day. One of the things that makes AvidXchange unique is the size of our payment network. So we've built an extensive payment network over the years representing 8,800 buyers. So those are the companies that are processing their payments through our network. So in 2023, there were 70 million vendor payments processed to over 1.2 million suppliers, which totaled $68 billion in payment volume. So lots going on in the payment network. But what that means is, on average, about 40% of the companies that you're paying are already set up and established in our network. So they've been paid through the network. They've already told us, what their preferred payment method is. We'll do all the onboarding for vendors that aren't yet in our network. We have a large supplier on our onboarding services team. It's over 400 people that do all the supplier onboarding and support. So they'll reach out to the vendors and suppliers. They'll review what the payment options are, what's available to get them set up on the vendor's preferred payment method. If that vendor does want an electronic payment, we'll also get all the banking details from the supplier. We store that information securely, and then we also manage any changes. So if they need to make updates to that information, we manage that as well. That way, you're not responsible for having to maintain sensitive banking information, just reducing your overall risk on your end. More and more companies today are, tech savvy, and they're really shifting their focus to working smarter, not harder. They want to be able to do more with less. So our team at Avid, we're talking to financial professionals, every day. And what they're telling us is they want to be able to streamline their AP process. They want to move away from, manual paper-based processing and workflows. They don't want to be manually keying in, hundreds or thousands of invoices or printing out, hundreds of checks each month. They also want to be able to scale without having to add headcount. And they want better visibility and control over their process, right? So they want to be able to get their invoices paid faster. They want to have more updated job costing information, and they want their vendors and subcontractors to get paid on time and securely. right? And the way to accomplish this is through automation. Manual processes, they create bottlenecks, inefficiencies, and they just make it really expensive to process invoices and payments. All right, so we're going to take a look at the before and after automation process. All right, so this here I think just does a good job illustrating really how time consuming and manual the invoice to pay process is when you're not using automation. So this might not be indicative of your exact process here, but generally speaking, these are typically the steps that are involved in the process, the feedback that we've gotten from, talking with thousands of companies over the years. But you have invoices coming in, right? Some might be coming in the mail, others are coming in electronically. Mail gets opened. In a lot of cases, companies are actually even printing the electronic ones out, putting them in a folder, and handing them off to someone to be coded and approved. So it might go to a project manager, and then they're actually handwriting the coding on that invoice and then handing it back to somebody in accounting. And then those invoices get manually keyed into the ERP system. Somebody's then selecting the ones that they want to pay. And then they're, printing out checks, printing them, folding them, stuffing them, stamping them, mailing them. So just, very labor intensive, time consuming. And then you have the follow-up, making sure that did the vendor receive their payments, dealing with, calls and inquiries on those payments, the bank reconciliation, filing. A lot of companies will still take that physical check and attach it to the invoice. And in some cases, it's still getting put into a filing cabinet. Right. And then you have just, again, your research for any issues or anything you encounter during that process. When you introduce automation, we can reduce that down to really a couple of steps here. So all of the places where you see the blue square with the X in it, these are steps that AvidXchange can automate. And so really you're just left with, making sure the right coding applies to that invoice, approving it, and then you're still in control of, selecting which invoices you want to pay and approving those payments. All right, so we're going to focus on how Timberscan and our embedded pay solution can automate your process, eliminating the paper chase, the duplicate manual and manual entry, and just giving you that control and visibility over the process. Before I shift gears and head into the product, I just have one more slide that I want to go through. I just want to kind of quickly talk about at a high level what that end-to-end flow would look like if you use Timberscan and AvidPay. All right, so this is an illustration of the process. Now, with Timberscan, you can really think of it as the front end of your Sage 300 CRE system. All right, so if you use Timberscan, the onboarding of the invoices, the entering, the routing and approval, that's all going to be done in Timberscan. And then once that invoice has been fully coded and approved, that's when it will get sent over to your Sage system. All right, so on the front end, we have some nice tools to be able to automate the onboarding of the invoices. For those companies that have an AP inbox set up where they're having all their vendors and subs send in the invoices, we can monitor that inbox. We can monitor multiple inboxes for those that maybe have different locations and different dedicated mailboxes set up. And then we also have something called auto acquire, where the auto acquire works in conjunction with the email monitoring. So we can set that up to automatically bring those invoices into Timberscan, assign them to a data entry person, have the system split the pages, and then also have the OCR and the smart extraction technology can populate information on the invoice. So somebody is not, manually keying all the information on that invoice. Okay, so it's really up to you on how much automation, you want to have on the front end. You can control that process. Now, one of the key things with Timberscan as well is you can partially code the invoice, all right? So a lot of times when the invoice comes in, the person that's entering the invoice isn't necessarily the person that knows what coding should be applied, what job, what cost code it goes to. So you can partially code an invoice and then the system will route it for approval so that the person approving it can, fill in or continue to build on that coding profile as it goes through the routing and approval process. Right, the system can also send notifications out, so approvers can get notified when they have a new invoice that lands in their queue. They can also get reminders. So if it's been in somebody's queue more than a certain number of days and you want the system to automatically ping them and remind them. Right, so you can set up those notifications as well. Just really, again, having some nice automation tools in place so that things are continuing to move along in a timely fashion. The final review step here, you see the step 4, it's an optional step. Typically, most companies are using it. And you can really think of that as just the final set of eyes on that invoice before it goes over to your Sage system. All right, so a lot of times companies want accounting just to have that last look. And then once that invoice has been fully coded and approved, there's an export function in Timberscan. So those invoices will get exported over to Sage. All right, so they get pushed into Sage as unposted invoices. And not only do we create the invoice record within your Sage system, but we also provide a link to that invoice image. All right, so that way, anything that you might have attached to that invoice as part of that routing and approval process, maybe it was a PO or a receiving ticket or insurance information, that packet that you've built throughout that routing and approval, that will also then be available for viewing within your Sage system. Now, one other thing to note here, just a little bit about the integration. So Timberscan was actually designed exclusively for Sage 300 CRE when it was initially developed. So very tightly integrated with Sage. And there's no duplication of data. So you don't have to enter separately, vendors into Timberscan or cost codes. We're reading that information from Sage. So from within Timberscan, you'll be able to see your vendors, your jobs, your codes. Now, once your invoices are in Sage, you will still manage the process to select those invoices within your Sage system. And so once you select the invoices you want to pay, that's where you can then leverage our payment network, right? So within Sage, instead of selecting a printer and printing out, physical checks, you would have an option on your menu that says print to Avid. That will then send those payments into Timberscan to be reviewed and approved. All right. And then once that payment is approved, we will pay that supplier based on one of these 3 payment methods you see here on the screen, either a virtual card, a direct debit payment we call AvidPay Direct, or they can get a physical check. All right. So it's really the vendor's choice on how they want to receive payments. And you can also earn rebates back. Any of your suppliers that take an electronic payment, you would earn rebates back on those transactions as well. But the key takeaway here is that you're always in control of the process. With the payment network, you never lose the ability to process a payment in-house. If you had a sub that stopped in and maybe wanted to pick up a check, you can always still do that. The goal is to be able to send us one payment file, and then you don't have to worry about splitting it out, batching them up that, hey, these are going to be checks, or these are going to be ACHs, or these are credit cards. You just send us that one file and we take care of, all of that for you, but still leaving you completely in control of the process. Nothing gets released to that payment network until you review and approve the payment. And we'll take a look at that when we get into the product demonstration as well. Okay, so I am going to share my screen here and we're going to head into the product. Okay, so this is the Timberscan solution. Now on my home screen here, you can see I have a dashboard view. And over here on the right, I can control which tiles I want presented on my dashboard. So this is just a quick way to see, invoices by various categories, by job, by vendor as an example. You can drill into the detail from the dashboard, or you can just hover and see, in this case, total dollars as well as total number of invoices by vendor, job, etc. Up at the top, this is really more of the general navigation. So the smaller buttons at the top, these are my functions. And then within each function, you have different actions available underneath here. Okay, you can also turn the dashboard off. So if I just hit the hide dashboard, and then if I hit this show data entry button, this would be more of the data entry view where I can see the invoices that are in my queue for processing. To kind of back up one step, the first step we talked about is acquiring, all right? So to get invoices in the system, I hit the acquire button and just say I want to acquire some images. So there's a few different ways to get invoices in the system. I'm just going to drag a couple here as an example. All right, so that's the drag and drop method where you can literally just drag them into the system. At the bottom, we do have to tell the system, what am I bringing in here? All right, so it's going to be invoices. Now, for those companies that want to leverage all the automation tools, if you use the email monitoring and the auto acquire, that's really designed to bypass this step here. Where basically using those tools, they can essentially, those invoices can just land right in someone's data entry queue. All right, you would still always have the ability to bring them in manually if you choose to as well. All right, when I'm on the acquire screen, if I hit this open file button, this is just another way to bring invoices in where you can browse to a file. So if you were just to use the email monitoring, if you didn't use the auto acquire, the email monitoring will just take attachments from the emails and put those invoices in a folder that you specify. So then in the acquire screen, you can just browse to the folder and then you can highlight the invoices and bring them in this way as well. Right, so a number of options available to get the invoices in the system. Over on the left, these are the pages that I acquired. So the first document was just one page. The second one had multiple pages. So you can easily split them out from here as well. If I wanted to take this, third page, I can just hit insert break, and now I've split that into two separate invoices for processing. Right, over on the right, you have the ability to, you can rotate it, you can despeckle or deskew. You have a number of annotation options if maybe you wanted to put, a sticky note on here with some text, or you could highlight, use the pen option. But once I've made any adjustments here, at the bottom, when I hit the process button in the lower right-hand corner, that's when Timberscan will take this batch of invoices here I'm working with, and it's going to go ahead and move them to whatever data entry group I specify down here at the bottom of the screen. Right? So this isn't anything to do with routing and approval at this point. This is just who these invoices are getting assigned to from an initial entry and review. Right, so lots of companies may just have one data entry group. They might have a primary person that enters and maybe someone that is a backup for that person. But you can separate if companies have multiple locations and they want a different data entry group by location. Some organizations might split invoices out in certain ways. They might have someone that just manages project-related invoices and maybe someone else that does just overhead. So lots of options on how you want to configure the system based on your specific scenario. Okay, so I'm going to head out of here. That is the acquire process. Now, once you have some invoices in the system here, you can either just at the top use the invoice entry option, and you can see here I got 15 invoices. So I can go in there and just start entering the batch. Or I could use this card view that I have if maybe I just want to, pick a particular invoice. So I'm just going to select this H&D Supply as an example. We'll notice here, so this compliance warning message pops up. For those of you that have compliance rules and tracking turned on in Sage, you will see those warnings here in Timberscan as well. And then you can click on the detail and see exactly what that message is all about. At the bottom, this is my entry grid. You can tailor this as well. It can be on the bottom like I have it. You might want it on the side if you had like an oversized monitor. You can also have it on a different screen. So if you have dual monitors, you could have the full image of the invoice on one screen and the data entry grid on another. So at the bottom here, this top section is my header information. And then at the bottom is really my line items. Okay, so the system will bring in, as I mentioned, we have smart extraction, and we have OCR technology. And that will read information on the invoice images as they're coming into the system and populate that information. Okay, that is designed to read header level information. Okay, it's not reading the line items on the invoice image. Any invoices that relate to a job commitment, the line items will be pulled from the job commitment from your Sage system. Okay, you can also change anything that the automated technology reads. So if it brought in this description, but you wanted to change this to something else, you can certainly do that. And then for the line items, we have a very tight integration, as I mentioned, with the job commitment in Sage. All right, if the commitment is on the invoice image, we can read it from there as well. If it's not, then you can just use the lookup here. So if I click on this list option, this will present me with open commitments for the vendor / job that is on that invoice. So here I have 2, so I'll just select the one here. And so the system is now presenting me with the line items that are on that commitment. So this particular commitment has 2 lines. You can hit this button at the top if you want to bring in all the line items, or you could just select individual lines. All right, and so it just asks you, are you sure this is the line that you want? Because it will create then all of the line items. So if you just checked off 10 line items, the system is going to automatically then create those 10 line items. All right, and so over here on the right, we give you a summary so you can see what that commitment was, the original amount, what's been invoiced against it. This Timberscan value is showing you what's in the process of going through the routing and approval. And you can see here, if you were going to have a negative scenario, it's going to give you that information here in red to get your attention. So this is more designed to be the summary level view. If you hit this commitment button down here at the bottom, this will give you the detailed view. So now it's going to show you the line items on that commitment. And so if I just scroll over here, I can see what the original amount was. Was there any change orders applied to that particular line? What's been invoiced, what's going through the routing and approval. I can see what's paid. Okay, so this information is available not only at the invoice entry stage, but your approvers will also be able to have access to this as well. So that will give them the information that they need to make informed decisions. We'll also give you tooltips here. So if I just hover over, in this case, the cost code, it will tell you the job to date costs on that code, what's going through the routing and approval, if there's any kind of variance. It gives you the same thing for the job. It'll tell you the revised contract amount, what's been billed against it, what's going through the routing and approval, and your balance. All right, so you'll have those tooltips all throughout the system. You can also attach supporting documents. So if there's any documents that you want to attach that are going to help get this invoice approved, you can either bring them in as a supporting document, or you can just use the attach function at the top, which gives you the ability to just browse and attach a document. Both will end up as another page here. If you bring it in as a supporting document, it means you've indexed it when you brought it into Timberscan. So then you can search for that document also independently of that invoice record. All right, so when you click on supporting document, it will present you with options here. And you can filter. So if you wanted to say, hey, I just want to see supporting documents that were coded to this commitment, and then you can click on it, see what it is, and determine if you want to go ahead and attach it. Just some other things here. You can always put what we call a comment, which is really a note on the invoice. So if you do put a comment, when this invoice is opened, that box will be opened automatically, so that the person that receives this invoice is going to know that, hey, there's something here that needs my attention. And you can always email from in here as well. If you wanted to just send the image of the invoice to somebody else, you can do that. But otherwise, once you've done your coding here, and again, you can partially code it. Maybe you just put the job in, and it's the approver's responsibility to put the correct cost code information. So like I said, you can have minimal information. And then when you accept it, the system will then go ahead and route that invoice for approval. And that will be done based on the business rules that you set up. All right, so the routing and approval is very flexible, lots of options for routing. You can have multiple levels of approval. You can also have dollar threshold parameters built into the process. So if, maybe if it's over a certain amount, it needs to go to, another person in those scenarios. Okay, so that is the entry process. Now, when it comes to approvals, there's a number of options available. Really depends on where the approver is located. For approvers that are in the office, they may want to use the desktop version, which is what we've been looking at. But if they're remote, they may want to use the Timberscan Go platform. All right, so Timberscan Go just gives them the ability to access securely via the internet without having to remote into the server. Okay, so when we initially designed and developed Timberscan Go, it was developed to be a tool for approvers to use to approve remotely, and they can approve on a tablet or a smartphone. We're building out Timberscan Go. So over the last few years, we've been continually adding additional information and functionality into Timberscan Go. So the goal is really to have all of the functionality of the desktop available within Timberscan Go. Okay, so for users that are in the office, I logged in as an approver, so they would have a dashboard here as well, and they can drill into the dashboard. They can use up at the top, if they just click on approve, they'll see, okay, I have 12 invoices, and then they may want to narrow it down. Maybe they just want to look at a certain job or a certain vendor. And here, pick this one. It looks really just like the invoice entry screen. You'll notice here the invoice note is opened. So that's what I was referencing before. This will be open so the user can see it. They'll see the commitment summary that we looked at. They can see the detail. Anything that was entered during the data entry process is all going to be available. So either they're going to review the information, or if they need to code it, then they can just click on it, and they'll have lookups, to the cost code file and that. So this is one option. If they are remote, then they can use Timberscan Go. So the nice thing here is for users that might want to just look based on a job, they can use their dashboard. And then if they click on a job, it shows them the jobs across the top. So they can just toggle to the different projects, and they can say, either select a particular invoice here. So if they click on it, they can see the coding information. If they say, edit all, it'll just bring them into the invoices. The notes, of course, will be open automatically. And then depending on the device they're on, this is more the grid view, has more of that spreadsheet look and feel, where they'll come in and they can see the coding, like I said, that was done. If their job is to code it, then they can just, use the lookup to select a cost code. They'll have the same functions, if they want to attach something to it. If they are on a smartphone or a tablet, this is the form view. So this will optimize based on the device they're on, where this will be more of the header information, and then this would be their the distribution lines. All right, they'll also be able to see those same tooltips that we looked at. So they'll be able to see, if they're going to have any variance for a cost code, they'll be able to see the commitment information. All right, so again, just some options available for approvers. There's also, if we look at here, You can see there's a lot of other options available in Timberscan Go. So you can acquire in here, you can do invoice entry, you can approve, final review. The things that aren't in Timberscan Go are more of your initial setup. So when you add new users or you need to build new workflows, that's still in the desktop. But like I said, we've been building out Timberscan Go to try to have as much available in the browser as possible. Okay, so with Timberscan here, one of the key elements is reporting and inquiry. So you have this great repository where you're storing, all your invoices. And so to be able to report off of those, you have reports and you have inquiries available. All right, so there's a number of reports in the system. I believe it's 19 total. And you can either use them more for management type reports, or there are some productivity based reports as well. So if you use the invoice status report, this would be more of a management report. So it's going to show me all of the invoices that are in the routing and approval, and then the total dollars. So I can use this to just drill into the detail. So this is the breakdown of those 43 invoices. So if you want to just look at what a particular user has. So if I just double click on Doug, now I'll just see these are Doug's 13 invoices, but you can quickly see when they were assigned. Over here on the right, you can actually link to that invoice image as well. So if you just click on it, it'll bring that up. You could fire off an email from here. All right, so this just gives you some visibility into who has what, how long. And then we also have the invoice status by job report. So this one is popular with Timberscan users as well. It shows you the same information that we looked at on the prior report, but we're just grouping it by project. So then if you come in here, you can see for this job, we break it down where there's 5 invoices that are in this data entry group, 3 that came in from our credit card solution. We have 1 here with Rebecca. All right, and then you get a subtotal. So here's the total for that job 03001. I have 21 invoices, total dollars, but you can still see when they were routed to that particular user. You can link to the image. All right, there's some other ones. I ain't going to go into all of these just in the interest of time here today, but you can also look at for commitments. You can see all of the invoices related to a commitment, whether they're still in Timberscan, meaning they're going through the routing and approval process, as well as invoices that have already been approved or maybe were even in Sage before implementing Timberscan. You can see how long does it take to process invoices through the system. And then you also have a number of inquiries available as well. So depending on the information you're looking for, will really kind of drive what inquiry you use. I'm going to focus on the job cost inquiry here for today. So you can see here, I can look at it by status. So I can see all what's paid or opened, and then by location. So if you just want to look at what's going through the routing and approval, you're going to select the Timberscan option. If you also want to look at what's already been approved and is in Sage, then you would check this current box. All right, and then you can select a date range. This is also the tool that you would use if you need to provide any kind of substantiated billing backup. You can pull that together really easily using this tool, so that if you wanted to run it for, say, a month, I'm going to pick all dates just to give myself a little more data to work with. You can run it for all jobs, or you can select certain jobs. All right, so I'm just going to select this Northwest Food Warehouse job. And then this is the query screen. All right, so this is all invoices for that one project. And you'll notice at the top, this is telling me, okay, I have 139 invoices for this job. It's also giving me a total. So I have 476,000 for this one project. And when I scroll over, you can see there's a lot of information. So you can control the columns that you see. This is where you can see the image. If you wanted to click on the invoice image, you could add a new comment. You can see the log. So this is all of the history for that invoice. And, I mentioned you can create a report. So if you do need to provide substantiated billing backup or reports for draw packages, you can also do some cleanup here. So if there were certain transactions that you didn't want to included in that report, or maybe there's a vendor you want to exclude, if I just right click, I can say I want to exclude a row, or if I select this range option, it gives me the ability to either include or exclude certain vendors. Right, so once I've kind of gotten this to where I want it, if I hit the report button in the upper left-hand corner here, I can tell the system I want to create, a PDF that has the images combined as well. And so down here on the bottom, I can say, what do I want included in my report package? So in addition to the invoice image, maybe you want to include supporting documents. You could have the payment record, the image of the payment, proof of payment included in there. There's an approval page. So I'll show you what that looks like. The system is building that and tracking all the steps of that workflow, incorporating it into a page that automatically gets attached to that invoice. You have a number of grouping options available. So if you wanted to group it maybe by a commitment or a cost code. So once you define your parameters and generate the report, this is just an example of what the report would look like. All right, so this would be your company at the top, and then this would be all of the invoice data. If you had applied any grouping, then you would see that there as well. And then behind this would be all of the images based on what you told the system you wanted included in that packet. All right, so this can be a real quick, easy way to pull together that backup for billing purposes, or if you just need to create a report that, maybe you have an auditor in-house. So I'm just going to cover here just some other things you can do with these inquiries. They're very powerful, so just want to give you an idea of how these work. The location and status columns here. So the location is telling me that these invoices are in Timberscan, meaning they're going through the routing and approval. And I can see these ones are in data entry. This is the data entry group they're with. This one's in final review. The ones that are in the approval, it'll tell you what level of approval they're at and which user they're with. And then if I scroll down, these are in accounts payable. So they've either already been processed through Timberscan and are in Sage, or like I said, they could be in Sage before you implemented Timberscan. The difference there is if I scroll over, the ones that were in Sage before implementing Timberscan, you wouldn't have a corresponding image available unless you decided to go back and attach one. But all the other information, would be there. So you'll still see all of the data, cost code information and that, from Sage. You just wouldn't have the image for the ones that were in there previously. Okay, so the columns you see here, you can, they're dynamic, so you can just start typing and it will narrow down the results. So you can also do multi-level. So if I just, hit opened here, and maybe you just want to look at opened for, a certain vendor. Okay, so you can do things like that. You can also use the, out of the box filters that we provide. So when I click on the drop down here, we have out of the box parameters. You can also click here and it will give you the ability to do some filtering. So if you were looking for something, contains is a good one to use, or maybe starts with. So you can just then start, typing in there and it's going to narrow down the results for you. You can also do custom, where if you wanted to come in here and, add conditions and do multiple, searches this way. Okay. The other thing you can do in here, which is helpful, is you can group. So any of the columns that you see here, you can drag them up and it will just group all the invoices for that particular value. So if you wanted to group it by vendor or maybe cost code, you just take that column heading and you just drag it up here. And so now the system went ahead and grouped all of those invoices by cost code. So then you can expand any of the cost codes out here to see these are all the 30 invoices for this cost code 2-220. So you'll still see all the same information. We give you a subtotal as well, so I can see 30 of my 139 invoices are for this code, and $64,000 of my 476 for the job are for this code. And again, approvers can have access to this as well. So if they want to come in and, maybe they want to look at my cost code or category before approving an invoice to see, hey, what's going on with that, code, or maybe they got a message that they're, over their estimate. Okay, so that's just a bit about the reports and the inquiries. Now, from a Sage standpoint, once the invoice has been approved, I mentioned there's a final review step, and then the invoices will get exported over to Sage. When we send them over here to Sage, you can view the image that I mentioned. So if you're in, say the invoice register here as an example, when you click on an invoice, the paperclip option at the top is going to be highlighted. So that gives you the ability then to just select that. And now here is, the image of the invoice. So this is everything, that invoice packet that I mentioned. So anything that was attached to that invoice as part of the routing and approval, all that's going to be viewable here via that link in Sage. So I can see the image. This is the approval page that I mentioned. So we're tracking, everything from the time it was received, acquired, entered, who approved it, who did the final review, when it's sent over here to Sage, anything that was attached. And then you can also see the payment information. Right, so it's nice to have that visibility within Sage. Now, when it comes to the payment side, once the invoices are here, you're still going to select the ones that you want to pay. And then when you come in to, print checks, the only difference here is that instead of selecting, a printer and printing out a batch of physical checks, you would have this print to Avid option. So when you select the print to Avid option, you do have to enter login credentials just from a security standpoint. And what that does is it will send the payment details over here to Timberscan Go. So whoever normally would sign your checks or approve payments, they'll be able to access all that information online. So they don't have to sit and, sign a bunch of checks anymore. They can come in here. And again, because you can access this securely via the internet, you don't have to remote into the server. They'll be able to see, okay, I have 13 payments in my approval queue. If I hit search, oh, sorry, I got timed out here. When you hit search, it'll bring back everything, or you can use the filters to kind of hone in on something particular. Each line item is a payment. Okay, so then I can come in here and I can filter if you just wanted to look at, payments by maybe a certain vendor or entity, or, based on a dollar amount. So when I click on the plus button here, I can see the invoices that make up the payment. All right. So sometimes, people that sign the checks like to look at the invoice backup as part of that approval process. So here, everything is available online. If I hit this browse all, it just puts the images over here in the left panel for me. So now I can review my payment information. I can see the invoice image, all the approval history, anything attached to it. And then the approve button up at the top here. So this goes back to that, having complete control over the process. Nothing gets released to the payment network until that payment is approved. All right. So once the payment is approved, that's when it will get released to the network. It's also at that point where funds get moved from your bank account to our money service businesses account. So AvidXchange is paying your suppliers from that money service businesses account based on their preferred payment method, either the virtual card, the AvidPay Direct, or the physical check. We certainly encourage e-payment adoption, but ultimately, at the end of the day, it is the vendor's choice on how they want to receive payment. So any vendor that wants a physical check, all of the checks are sent with positive pay. So that's another thing that you don't have to worry about. We will then provide all of the positive pay files. You don't have to create ACH files or, send remittance information. Our team does all of that. Okay. The other nice benefit with the checks then, not only do you not have to do positive pay files, but it's also our bank account information that's on the checks. So, probably, 7 out of 10 companies that I talk to have gotten hit with some sort of fraud, with the lion's share typically being around check fraud. So that's also another benefit. You don't have to worry about your bank account information floating out there on the checks. It's Avid's bank account information. Okay, so once the payments are approved, then you have the payment inquiry. So with the payment inquiry, you can also use the search to see everything, or you can, use the filters. So this is really designed to give you, really a view into everything here. So with this one inquiry, and you can control all of your columns and that, you can see the payment method. So this will tell you the payment method that vendor chose. All right. So the VCC is a virtual card. This was an AvidPay check. This is the AvidPay Direct. It will tell you the status of the payment, okay? And you can, again, use filters if you just want to hone in on a particular status. It will also show you proof of payment. So the piece of paper with the $sign, you can click on that and it will show you the proof of payment. So this was a virtual card as an example. Checks that we send out, the cleared check image will automatically get attached to the invoice. And that'll be viewable here as well. When I hit the plus button, this is my invoice information. All right. So I have proof of payment. I can see my invoices that were part of this payment with the invoice image, all the approval history. And I also have my payment approval here as well. So I can see the payment approval history. All right. One other thing that I wanted to mention, won't have time to go, into detail here, but we do also have a lien waiver solution. We're actually going to be releasing the latest version this quarter, where we've incorporated the ability to create your own lien waiver templates within our system, and we have also integrated with DocuSign. So what this does here is, if you use the lien waiver solution, with the payments, when you are approving payments, you will have visibility to see if there is, here you can see payments blocked because there's an unconditional partial primary lien waiver, right? So you can control whether it's blocked or just worn. But like I said, we do, if that's something of interest, we do have a lien waiver solution that will give you the ability with the DocuSign integration. The lien waivers will automatically be created in the system, sent out via DocuSign. They'll come back via DocuSign and get linked to the compliance item within the Sage system. The signed lien waiver also automatically gets attached to the invoice as well. And then you have the visibility here with the payment approval process, and also a lien waiver log. So the lien waiver log gives you the ability to see the status of all of the lien waivers, what's outstanding, what's been received. Okay, so let me go back here, and we're just gonna wrap up with a brief summary of the benefits of automation, why companies are choosing to automate their invoice to pay process. So when you automate with AvidXchange,
just real quick, make sure you stop sharing your screen.
Oh, there we go. Sorry about that.
Thank you.
Okay, there we go. All right. So when you automate with AvidXchange, you're going to be able to reduce your costs, both the direct and indirect costs, by having that end-to-end automated accounts payable process. You'll also have the ability to earn rebates when you send qualifying transactions through the Avid Payment Network, and then those rebates can offset or even exceed the cost of using AvidPay. You're going to gain back visibility, being able to access all the invoices and the payment statuses. Plus, you're going to have more timely job cost reporting. Maintaining control, being able to manage and approve the invoice and payments all in one platform. And you're going to have the ability to analyze the data with customizable reports and dashboards. Increased efficiency, so eliminating all the paper, the manual tasks, and the errors. It's going to just give you the ability to move your business forward faster. And that ties into the next one here, scaling seamlessly. The efficiency gains from automating, it's going to be able to grow your business without having to scale the costs or add headcount. And then reducing risk. This is a big one. I think this is probably top of mind for most companies nowadays, but by paying your vendors more quickly based on the status of their invoice and their lien waiver, providing more e-payment options, it's going to be able to mitigate the risk associated with check fraud, and just provides more options to pay your suppliers and subs based on their particular cash flow needs. All right, so just to put it in perspective, it costs approximately $19 to process an invoice and a payment manually versus $7 if you can automate the process. So that's roughly about a $12 savings per transaction. So if you multiply that out, that's a lot of savings there, plus the rebates that you can earn back on electronic payments. So just a lot of significant potential from an ROI standpoint. We can also do a vendor match. So there's a report that we can send you to run, and that gives us the ability to then do a match against our vendor network. That will tell us how many of your vendors are in our payment network, how many are already set up to accept electronic payments. And that gives us the ability to tell you what your rebates would look like, and even to be able to provide a minimum guaranteed rebate, right? So that way you have a predictable return on investment. All right, so I'm gonna stop there. I wanna make sure that we have time for questions. So I'm gonna turn it over to Mars to see if we have any questions that we need to address.
Yeah, no, that was a great presentation, and you do have a good chunk of questions. So if anybody is hopping off, we do want to thank you for joining us today, but make sure that if you have any questions, please put that in the Q&A session now, and we're going to get to them here shortly. So let's start with our first question. We have to submit invoice copies as backups for our customer requisitions. How can Timberscan allow us to do this? Can invoice images be tagged to a customer requisition?
So if it's for billing for that particular customer, yes, that would be the billing backup report that I mentioned, where you can run it for a project for a date range. So if you need to pull together all the image backup, you can do that.
Perfect. Next question. Can you pay a partial payment on invoices?
Yeah, so you can control how much you want to pay against the invoice. So if you decide that, for whatever reason, you don't want to pay the full amount, then you can note that on the invoice as you go through the routing and approval. And then, once it's in Sage and you select it, to pay, then you can say that you just want to, pay whatever amount you want to pay on that particular invoice. But that would really be managed more on the Sage side.
Perfect. Next question. Currently, our inventory invoices get receipted and then posted to AP to pay, so the two communicate. Will this still function that way?
Yeah, great question there. So Timberscan's integration is with the job commitment. So for companies that are using Sage purchasing or inventory, the workflow process would be a little bit different. So if you're receiving, you have to receive in the purchasing module, and then that invoice gets posted to the accounts payable module. So for those invoices, those would get entered into Sage as they are today, posted over to accounts payable. And then we do have a function in Timberscan to be able to bring that transactional data in. So basically you would acquire the invoice images into Timberscan, and then there's an import function to take the data that you entered into Sage and then we marry those transactions together within Timberscan.
Perfect. Next question. Our credit card statement has to be broken down by line item and then each transaction gets entered. Would this work with that when there are a ton of invoices, / can it be broken up into this, I imagine, Timberscan?
Yeah, so yeah, good question there. We actually have a credit card solution. Wouldn't be able to go into that in depth today. So if that's something of interest, I would recommend, setting up another session. But you can either just acquire the the receipt images in that into Timberscan and bring them in as invoices, or if you want to use our credit card solution, that gives you the ability to your credit card holders would have a mobile app that they can use. So as they're making purchases on those company credit cards, they can just take a picture of the receipt, and then it's essentially an e-form. So they would have the ability to provide the coding at that point as well. So they'd have a lookup to jobs and cost codes. And then once they submit that receipt, there's a reconciliation process on the back end. So statement items get brought in from the bank, and then the system will auto reconcile the receipt submitted by the card holders to the the statement items. So it's really designed to have a nice, easy tool to use on the front end to be able to get those receipts, in quicker, and then also save time on the back end, not having to do a manual reconciliation. And then to your question, the options when you bring those transactions into Timberscan. So once you reconcile, there's a button that says send them to Timberscan, and then you can choose whether you want to do receipt style or statement style. So receipt style would be each receipt is basically an invoice, or statement style would be your statement would be the invoice, and then you would have just individual line items on the invoice for the individual transactions. So it sounds like that's what you were looking for, more the statement style, but all of the receipt images come into Timberscan as well. So for those companies, if you need to provide that billing backup, that includes your credit card purchases and that, all that information is now in Timberscan and can be incorporated into that billing backup report as well.
Perfect. Next question. Will it recognize a duplicate invoice? Sometimes a company sends an invoice electronically and then in the mail. If one has already been entered, would it recognize the second one as a duplicate based on the invoice number? Currently, it does do that.
Yes, it would. Yep. So we will flag up the duplicate. So when we are bringing invoices into Timberscan, we're looking at duplicates that might exist in Timberscan as well as in your Sage system. So yes, the system will let you know if it's a duplicate.
Can we add multiple cost codes to one invoice?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, from an entry standpoint, it really should mimic how you enter invoices in Sage today. So we replicate Sage's AP data entry grid. So whatever columns you have on your grid, you'll see those same columns in Sage, and the same business logic, and that would apply. So it really should be, from a user experience standpoint, very similar to entering an invoice into Sage, as if you were entering it into Sage.
Awesome. If we have 20 project managers that would need to approve, is that possible? Additionally, if we send the invoice to the wrong approver, can they forward to the correct approver?
Yes. Yep. So Timberscan, it's licensed based on named users. It's an annual subscription. So yep, you can have as many users as you like. So if you have 20 different, project managers, probably a common rule would be routing by project. So the system will know which project manager the invoice goes to based on the job that's on the invoice. But certainly, yes, if it gets routed to the wrong person, they can route it to the correct person. They can either reject it back to data entry, or if it was, maybe someone else was responsible for or needed to go to a different job, they could change the job on it, and then it would, reroute to whoever's responsible for that job.
Okay. Does the payment system support joint checks?
So You can do joint checks in Timberscan, but as far as the payment network, no. So the two really kind of exceptions with the payment network are we do not process international payments, and we are not able to send joint checks through the payment network. So you could still use the payment network for all your other payments, but if you had any international or joint payments, then those you would need to, process in-house, and then you could send the other payments through the payment network.
Okay. We have this question. It may need, for Lisa, you might need to send a little bit more, but what about AIA? Leanne, can you answer that without much context?
Yep. No, you can, yes, you can process, AIA documents and invoices, pay apps through the system as well. We support those, not a problem.
Okay. We have a lot of manual purchase orders. How would those work?
So if you are using the Sage purchase order module, that kind of goes back to it's kind of the same question around the inventory. So Timberscan doesn't look or communicate directly with Sage's purchase order module. But if you're creating purchase orders that in turn create a job commitment, we would bring in the information on the invoice from the job commitment. Okay, we also do have a purchasing solution. It's part of our Timberscan form suite. So Timberscan does talk to that purchasing solution. But for that one, if you're using purchasing, we should probably have a more in-depth conversation just to understand a little bit better about, what you're using and what your process looks like, and then, explain in probably more detail what that would look like on the Timberscan side.
Our next question, and thank you for everyone. And Leanne, if you have another meeting after this, please shut me down, and I'll forward these messages, these questions on to you as well for later. But we have pay when paid and do a lot of other qualifiers such as supplier waiver, insurance, up to date, subcontract or co-returned, etc. Can this all be automated?
Yeah, so with the lien waiver solution, you can send out, like I said, with our release that's coming out here this quarter, you will be able to create the lien waivers, in our system. They can be sent out via DocuSign. So today, from a compliance standpoint, it'll give you compliance messages or warnings based on any compliance rules you have set up in Sage, when you're going through the routing and approval process. For the payment side, you will be able to see if you have any outstanding waivers as part of the payment process, but the system is not going to, it's not looking, I'll say, at other compliance items right now as part of the payment review. So that would need to be kind of tracked and managed as you go through your invoice routing and approval, and to make sure that you have those compliance items addressed. But you can see the lien waiver if you have outstanding lien waivers as you're reviewing the payment for approval.
Okay. Since you're talking about lien waivers, we have a question about lien waivers. In regards to lien waivers, can multiple waivers be attached to a check? General contractors require different waivers for each vendor to complete by project.
Yeah, so you can have different waivers. You can also have specific templates, set up by job. So our lien waiver functionality does require that you are using Sage's compliance tracking. So you would need to have the waivers set up as a compliance item in Sage. And then with the new release that is coming out, based on your Sage settings, when you say initiate the payment, that will create the waiver in our system based on, whatever template applies. So it'll automatically create them, and then you can send them out via DocuSign. But you can have specific templates by job or vendor, I should say, too.
If using AvidPay, does the whole amount of the payment run get debited from our account, or is it as they are paid or cleared? Are you holding all of our money up front?
So yeah, so the money will get moved when the payment is approved. So it's really at the point that, when you're in Timberscan Go and you hit the approve button, that's when the payments get sent to the network. And that's when we do debit your account. We don't do one lump chunk debit. It is individual debit. So if you approve 10 payments, you're going to see 10 individual debits. So just from a tracking and reconciliation standpoint, we do it that way to make sure that it's easy to track and reconcile. But yes, it is at the point of when the payment is approved that we will transfer the money gets moved from your account to our account, and we go ahead and process the payments to the vendors.
Okay. I'm going to make this one kind of our last question for now. I know that there are a lot of questions that we haven't handled just yet, but just to be respectful of everyone's time, I'm going to kind of duel this one, Leanne, so stick with me here. Okay. So we have this question: how are payments from online portals handled? But with that, we also had somebody ask about Timberscan Go. I'm not sure if you can kind of joint those two questions together and with one answer, or I'll let you answer that.
Okay. All right. So how are payments from the online portals handled? Payable, vehicle, invoice, and vendor. Okay. So yeah, I guess I'm not 100% clear on exactly what they're, asking. So you could still continue if you want to pay your certain bills, online, then you can do that. It would show as paid in Timberscan. But the proof of payment, you're not going to see the proof of payment unless you attach it to the invoice. Anything you send through our payment network, the proof of payment will get attached automatically. And then there is a function in Timberscan. If you processed a payment in-house, like a check as an example, you could attach the check image to that invoice. But if it's an electronic payment, it will, like I said, it will reflect that it was paid based on the status in Sage. But if you wanted, like a proof of payment attached to the invoice, then you would need to, attach that to the invoice image within Timberscan. It's not going to happen automatically unless the payment goes through our payment network. But we do have, certainly, vendors that will, like utility vendors, where we can go online and process a payment that way, using the payment network. So it could be that some of those payments that you're mentioning that we could process through our network and automate that for you. And then Timberscan Go, what was the question about Timberscan Go?
The question about Timberscan Go, it was kind of just around, let me see, if payments are only approved with Timberscan Go, or does it have to be on the desktop? I assume that since online portals, payments, they kind of went together, but I don't know if it, I can display the question just so you understand.
It's okay. Okay. The, okay. Yeah. So the payment approval process is just in Timberscan Go. And we did it that way because, just the remote access, so that they don't have to remote into the server to do it via the desktop. So with Timberscan Go, they can, approve anywhere they have the internet connection in a browser without having to remote into the server.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. Like I said, we do have a lot of questions, so I do apologize if your question was not touched on today. I will, any questions, whether they were answered or not, I will pass on to your account managers, and they'll be happy to answer them. If not, I'm sure Leanne would be happy to work with everyone to make sure that you have the full scope of what Timberscan can do for your company. If any questions were to come up later, especially if you're going back watching this recording or sharing it with your team, please feel free to reach out to anybody on the Action team, whether it be at info@action.com. My email, mdeemer@action.com, was also included in your webinar reservation email, as well as your reminder email. So please feel free to reach out to that, or as always, reach out to Leanne or your account manager. We want to thank everybody for coming today. If you could take the time and fill out our post-webinar survey, that would be much appreciated. Your feedback is extremely important to us. With that being said, I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you, Leanne, for your time today, and thanks for the extra 10 minutes that you took to answer all these questions and make sure everybody understood what was going on. So we will see you all next time, and have a wonderful day.
All right. Thanks, everyone.